All right.
Excellent. All right.
Let's get started. Hey, Lance Hahn. How you doing?
Red Star. I'm good, man. How about you?
I'm doing great. I am so excited to be recording this inaugural broadcast, hopefully, of our conversation around work leaders and so many topics coming out of, just all the things that work leaders have to care about right now. We're talking about HR folks. We're talking about business executives. We're talking about managers. Anybody who has to, kind of think about the work that's about the work, or how to make the work happen, or bring people together to do the work. And so I'm really honored to be here with you today, and really excited to talk about some of those topics.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I mean, one of the things we've seen, especially through the pandemic, is just the expansion of HR beyond the confines of the silos, which is why we, when we talk about the newsletter and introduce that, I mean, it's really focused on work leaders rather than HR specific, because we just see the boundaries really expanding quite a bit, which is, I think, exciting. I mean, it's also a big challenge too.
Yeah, I can't even use the word HR anymore, that phrase. Like, it just doesn't seem to capture, what the gravity of that role is. I tell this story all the time. But a lot has changed. It's like we used to talk about the future of work, and then the future of work just arrived on our doorstep. It shared some similarities with what we thought it would be, but a lot of the things are radically different.
That's right.
And we're no longer preparing for the future of work. We're trying to figure out how to, live in it. And also, HR folks have just, after a 20 or 30 year initiative to, quote, get a seat at the table, I would say that they're at the head of the table right now.
They got it.
Yeah, they got it. And they got it in with a much wider mandate than I think what people initially, were kind of thinking about. For instance, you see this convergence of, what I call work experience and employee success, where, HR was often, kind of tasked around, kind of the employee success component. But when it came to like, what workflow tool are you using, or what project management tool are you using, those weren't really kind of considered the domain of HR. But now there's such an emphasis on, how the way that we work and how we're supported in doing our work come together, that the domain of HR is really extending as well. And the story that I was going to tell is that if we went back in time, 5-10 years ago, and we did like a day zero exercise, a scenario planning exercise, and we said, look, with all the brightest minds in the world in the room, look, about 5 years from now, there's going to be a world-changing pandemic, and it's going to be called COVID, and we need to figure out who the chief COVID officer is going to be. There's no way that people would have selected HR. There's no way that, it should be the HR person, right? But that's kind of what happened during the pandemic, is that, the HR leaders, and a lot of this was defrayed to managers as well, became the chief COVID officer, and had to deal with everything from getting people set up to work remotely, to administering tests, to vaccine policy, to PR, to, like all of this stuff that, you never could have imagined. But
that's right.
My experience is that who else could have done it, in retrospect. And I think it really did bring a lot of things into sharp focus around, who should be responsible for the people part of the business, which is all of it. And what role should they play, and, what should our expectations be? So we're talking today in a radically changed world from 2 years ago. Yeah.
It's a perfect time to launch a newsletter, right?
Well, so why did you launch this newsletter? Tell us about this newsletter.
Well, to be candid, all this shit happened at once. Usually changes like this happen over years, decades. This stuff happened all at once. And like we talked about, just overnight they were the chief COVID officer, they were the chief work experience officer. They were trying to navigate their entire organization all at once. And so what we wanted to do is create something that was inclusive of everybody who was touching that work experience, who was touching employee success, who was touching, how our organization is going to define, where sort of work intersects with people, what that future is going to look like. And so we wanted to make it sort of a big tent, newsletter for that purpose alone, because we believe, I think we believe fundamentally that, as work has shifted, the roles of, traditional HR, of managers, of executives has been much more people focused. And I think mostly for the better, but that there's a lot of guidance that needs to take place there. And so, my background, obviously, I worked in HR for nearly a decade. I've written for HR publications, trade publications, done events, done a bunch of conferences for them, and know a lot about this group of folks. And so wanted to really start focusing on this group of folks and bringing sort of our sensibility of someone who's been very involved in the tech and services side of this business, but also someone who's spent a lot of time with HR leaders and recruiting leaders and all those folks that are on the work management side of things. So that's the main reason we want to start this.
Yeah. So I want to, pull on a couple of threads there and, kind of build the entire context. So you've worked with the Star Conspiracy for how long now? Just
celebrated 9 years.
9 years
in April, in mid-April. So yeah.
So it's 9 crazy. Years at the Star Conspiracy, and you took a break in the middle of that. And what did you do during that break?
Yeah, I took I kind of turned it a paid sabbatical, unplanned, a little bit, but I worked. I originally came to the Star Conspiracy from a company called ERE Media, which runs ERE.net, TLNT.com. I'd worked there for about 3 years. I jumped ship January 2020 to work on TLNT.com, be the editor in chief there, and that lasted 5 months until the events business shut down, which is responsible for a good portion of the revenue that was taking place. So had to consolidate a little bit. Found welcoming arms back at the Star Conspiracy right after that.
Well, we're so happy that you're back. I'm so sad though about all of the challenges that a lot of organizations face because of the pandemic, especially people who had stuff tied to live events. Unless you had the scale of like an LRP media or something like that, it was really hard to navigate that time. And so you were at ERE before the Star Conspiracy, before you started working with the Star Conspiracy, and then before that you were in HR, right?
Yeah, I was in HR before then.
And what was your HR role like?
Oh, I did HR for a number of organizations. Started off like a lot of folks do, sort of on the HR assistant, HR ops sort of thing. Did recruiting. Was in a manager role for a number of years, and then focused more on sort of director level stuff on sort of my last thing. And then as often happens, the recession hit at the right time. It was a good time to sort of get out of HR after going through those challenges as an HR leader, and being sort of the front end of lots of layoffs and those sorts of things as well. Just felt like it was time to do something else. I'd been writing about HR for a number of years before then, just kind of freelancing. I worked my first freelancing job was for Vault.com. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, really?
Those guys, career advice folks. So yeah, I was doing that, a little bit of that, and then when I sort of like switched things up, ERE was a good opportunity to sort of get out of that, and it's been kind of a nice pivot from that experience.
Yeah. So I've been on this side, on the agency side, and, kind of out here floating around, the market for a long time. And I remember that transition being pretty smooth, from my perspective, because it feels to me like you were, pretty well known as an influencer and we're very kind of thoughtful and intentional about, taking your experiences in HR, and writing about it, come from a best practice perspective, across not just technology, but, people issues and stuff like that. So it seemed like a real natural transition to move from HR into the media side of things, and then, the service side of things. How did you get into HR? I mean, how does anyone get in HR, but how'd you get into HR?
I think a lot of folks will tell you that they don't get into HR intentionally. Mm-hmm. A lot of recruiters are in that boat as well. I certainly fell into it. Had an opportunity early on during college to sort of run operations for sort of a student-led business, mm-hmm. which part of that was hiring 60, 70 student employees per semester to run computer labs when those were a thing at colleges, and so it was kind of my first taste. After college, went to a retailer where they were sort of converting stores. They had just acquired a local chain here in Portland, and they were converting those stores to their brand. So lots of training, lots of going between stores and doing that. So that's kind of how I got my start. And then I just kind of continued to move up, from a maturity perspective to different types of roles across all kinds of industries, from like technology and we worked for a lead gen company for a while, mm-hmm. in HR, worked for, a industrial organization, manufacturing organization. So it's been a really interesting HR journey in that thing. But, I always like to tell people I've been out of HR for now longer than I worked in HR. And so a lot of this is about, using my contacts and continuing to keep in touch with folks that are actually doing the work, talking with them on a regular basis, keeping track of sort of what they're doing and how their career's evolving. That's a big part of, what I try to do to kind of keep up on it, in addition to just doing a lot of research and that sort of thing too.
Yeah, well, I would say from my perspective, you're definitely, if not if not the most, then one of the most grounded people in the actual, what we use the phrase practitioner a lot, but in the actual, right. HR world, probably not a great phrase, to use, when you're kind of looking from the outside in, but you're really looking from the inside out. So you've stayed very close to HR for a long time. And I'm just curious, how significant, how large do you think is the gap? I mean, just, for context, the Star Conspiracy is best known for helping work tech companies with customer experience stuff like brand and marketing and sales and product and that sort of thing. And so we, end up living in kind of the vanguard or the, kind of innovative part of the market where, we're working with a lot of vendors who are in emerging markets, where they're bringing new solutions to market, where their, thought leadership and best practice seems, in some cases to be pretty far out in front of, what's actually happening at the ground level. I have a question in two parts. First, how big do you think that gap is between, the day-to-day experience of, managing and leading people from an HR perspective inside companies versus, what's out there on the vanguard from a technology and services perspective? And second, has that gap closed a little bit over the last 2 years because of, a broad rethinking of the HR role and, the employee experience role due to the pandemic?
Yeah. It's a great question. It's a loaded question too, Brett.
It's not loaded.
It's a little bit because it's a lot of stuff in there. I mean, I think generally speaking, I think it kind of obviously depends a little bit on sort of what subcategory we're talking about. But the best part about this job is getting to talk to so many people and get so many different perspectives and sort of dream a little bit. I mean, I think a lot of HR practitioners are stuck voluntarily and mostly involuntarily. At least, when you look, 3 years ago, especially, so go back to 2019. a lot of them were just like stuck in sort of, slow-mo, it felt like, so, they could dream big. They could do one or two things, a year, especially if you're at an enterprise organization. That might even be a stretch. And, the world kind of just quickly passes you by, and you try to reset every little bit. So I think that gap was substantial, especially in some areas that I think we were always really excited about, around employee experience, around engagement, around sort of the potential of, learning and just all these really cool, I think, technologies and companies we work with, so trying to ground that reality with also getting people excited about, what they could possibly achieve is a big part of what, I think collectively we try to guide folks towards is, really just try to, give them the dream, but also give them the path to do that, and knowing that it's going to be tough, that any change management is going to be really a tough thing to do. What I can say now, just from talking to lots of HR folks that are kind of coming out of the pandemic, is they've got more license to work on this stuff, which is exciting, but it's also, they're also figuring out, like, how do we prioritize this? How do we make room in our organization, and how do we sort of manage the change? So if you're updating a back-end system like a payroll system or a human capital management system, there's not a lot of necessarily forward-facing, employee-facing change to be involved in. When you're talking about some of the the work experience platforms that we're talking about, communication systems, things like Slack or like Teams. New entrances into that's a different thing, and that's I think we alluded to it earlier, sort of a newer motion for folks. So I think we're getting closer. The gap's getting smaller, but also they've got a different set of problems to deal with right now.
Yeah, it's interesting because the way that I don't know that this is a real narrative, so I'm going to tell you this narrative, and then you tell me if this is accurate or not. But it's my perception, because we just kind of, you and I look at different things, and just based on what our roles are and stuff like that. And, one of the things that I look at a lot are RFPs that are, submitted by HR practitioners and companies to, work tech software companies. And I've seen a really significant change in the way that RFPs are structured right now that, to me, kind of points to, a big shift that's happening in the market. So it's my perception that prior to the pandemic, HR folks generally were working on some sort of 3-year strategic vision. That's the thing that I always heard over it, is that everyone has a 3-year plan. And like you said, year 1 is some big initiative, year 2 is some big initiative, year 3 some big initiative, but you can really only do like 1 or 2 really big things a year. And then you hope to, kind of gain some success and some trust and buy permission to do the next big thing. And you're just kind of constantly trying to move the organization forward, one step at a time in a very strategic, planned way. And when you go out to, buy technology in the year, 2019, you knew the categories that you wanted to buy from. You would send an RFP with, specific features and benefits, kind of checklist, just to make sure that, all the tech stuff was, crossed off the list, that it had the features that you were looking for, and, kind of your perfect tech stack and how this part fit in, et cetera. And now RFPs are more like, hey, here's what we're trying to do. Here's the big idea. What you got, what you got, and what can you teach us? And so to me, it feels like, along with that license that you mentioned to do more, people are also kind of lost because they basically can do anything that they want to do. But a lot of that includes so many things that they feel need to be changed and can be improved. And they're not quite sure how the pieces fit together because the market's in such flux in terms of, kind of new categories coming to market or new innovations or whatever. So it does seem like there's a lot more latitude for prosecuting a more aggressive, kind of vision, but that it's harder now because you're doing multiple things at once, and it's not really clear what like the best combination is. Whereas 5 years ago, you need an integrated talent management system, you need an HCM system, you need a payroll system. It just seemed like a little bit more straightforward, slow paced, and evolutionary. And like we're in a revolutionary period right now.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I think one of the challenges too is with that slow movement also gives you those abilities to look at case studies, look at go to a conference presentation and learn how XYZ company has implemented their integrated talent management system. That only happens whenever we're going at sort of that glacial pace, right? Mm-hmm. So I think you're right. I mean, I think your observation is spot on as far as, I think organizations are looking outside of their walls to sort of figure out how are we going to increase communication. Our CEO just announced that we're going to be digital first. Mm-hmm. We're going full remote. How are we going to solve the numerous problems that come with that? Some of the challenges that come with, creating connective tissue inside of an organization, creating, channels of communication that have the right level of casual and formal.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of case studies for this stuff. So it totally makes sense that you're going to vendors and you're saying, well, here's kind of what we're thinking about. Here's the challenges we're trying to solve. What do you have? And it may be embedded in RFP. It may be embedded, I think, a lot of times in the research process for a lot of these new solutions. Is they're trying to pick out keywords as they're going through copy, mm-hmm. as they're looking at webinars and demo videos. They're trying to pick out, oh, that's an interesting idea, and then they're bringing those ideas to when they're shopping for other solutions. Well, can you do this? Okay, well, if we do this and we do this, so you're thinking more intentionally about your tech stack, and you're kind of doing it all at once. So you're trying to sort of bring your crystal ball, look into the future, and at the same time trying to give yourself the most openness to say, well, maybe if we use this as our communication platform, this gives us the most options to integrate it with lots of different things that we see down the road that we don't even have on our playbook right now, but could be elevated. I don't know, maybe next year, maybe 6 months from now. It's hard to say, right?
Yeah, and what a huge opportunity. And that's the thing, it's like part of me kind of feels bad for HR people right now because they've got so much shit going on. But the other part of me is like, this is the opportunity that we've all been waiting for. When you think about just the broad mandate and latitude that people have to think about the future and to build the future that they want in terms of the employee experience and work experience and all that stuff. At the same time, there's all this other stuff happening, not the least of which is you have to keep your current employees happy, which is increasingly difficult, right? Because of, it's like the world is totally screwed up right now, right? And so we don't know if we want to go back to work or don't want to go back to work, or if we should make people go back to work or not make them go back to work. Are things getting back to normal? Are they not getting back? It's just crazy. And so there's so much work to be done that's not future focused, but that's right now focused around shoring up the employee experience that people are having in their company because of all this uncertainty. And, all these various, kind of positions and theories about where the world's going to be 6 months from now and a year from now. And on top of all of that, 50% turnover across all industries in employees in 2021, right? And so one of the biggest periods of, the Great Resignation, don't get me started on that label, but you've got all these, you've got to fix the problems with the experience of your current employees. You have to continue to attract new candidates and fill the, revolving door of, talent that is leaving a lot of organizations looking for a different work experience. And you have this opportunity to chart a course for the future. And so on the one hand, it can be very overwhelming. On the other hand, it's a huge opportunity to, directly impact the, the next 20 years of a company's future. How do people manage? Lance, how do they manage?
If there was an easy solution, we would just package it up and sell it, right? Because we could probably make a lot of money off that. One of the interesting things that came up this week when I was working on the newsletter is ADP actually recently did a survey of 33,000 employees, and they found that 2/3 are like still resisting going back to the office. They don't want to go back to the office full time. And you know, one of these surveys comes out every single week, it seems like. But I mean, when you're ADP and you survey 33,000 people, that's something else.
It's a big deal.
But you know, we talk about resignations in 2021 being very high, being record breaking. Still, 55% of people are either actively looking or considering looking for a new job right now. You know, so I mean, the stuff isn't over. I think a lot of folks, especially the HR folks that are a little bit more maybe not so interested in like innovative and thinking about the future of work and thinking about how they're going to transform their organizations. They're just hoping like, hopefully we just like turn back the clock on 2019. Yeah, we can just I know how to do that shit. Yeah. Which I totally get, because like I love just being able to just kind of go into, you know, go to automatic and get to work. But it's hard to, I mean, it's hard to not have empathy for, you know, HR folks in particular who have just like gone through all this change, and we're just asking them to continue on.
Yeah. And hasn't it fundamentally changed the profile of what, you know, like the executive team is going to be looking for in terms of you know, a people leader, an HR leader, CHRO, whatever you're talking, you know, whatever you want to call it. You know, it feels like that was a stability position, you know, 5 years ago. You wanted somebody who could, you know, lock down the people processes and deliver predictable results, and, you know, make sure that payroll happened and that the benefit stuff was taken care of, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, it wasn't a position necessarily where the profile was, we need a really innovative, you know, change management leader who is going to, you know, deliver a lot of creative tension for us and push us and try to move us into the future. And it seems now more than ever that people are looking for exactly that in their HR leaders. They're looking for folks to bring, you know, big horizontal ideas to the table that have an impact on the entire way of being for a company. And so it seems like the, you know, kind of the profile has changed a little bit for, you know, what HR leadership is going to look like over the next 5 to 10 years. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's gotten more difficult to find a solid CHRO, just because you do have to get all those foundational things right. You can't miss payroll. You know, you talk about we talk about moments that matter in the employment experience. Missing a paycheck or having a paycheck delivered is one of, like, I mean, talk about the nosedive that happens. So you can't give that up in the pursuit of innovation. So it makes a person that you might just say like, hey, this person is great at their job. You know, they're going to keep the trains running on time. They're going to keep us foundationally stable. That's going to be a person where we can give up a little bit on the innovation, because we don't see that as being something that we need for our organization. Now we're going to ask them to do both. And so I do wonder if there's a little bit of role sharing there too. And I think you see more C-level executive CEOs in particular, but also COOs driving some of that workforce change. They have taken that leadership mantle as well in the interim, because again, this is a really tough. It's really tough to find somebody that can build a really stable, you know, train that moves, very expected experience for all those things that you want to run right, and somebody that needs to innovate and help you, you know, attract your next 10,000 employees, keep the ones that are already there, you know, move with whatever changes happen in their industry. So it's not easier. It's tougher for sure.
Well, I'm just, you know, do you think that this puts like the traditional block and tackling of HR at risk in terms of execution risk? Like, are people going to over rotate so much in the direction of employee experience and innovation and, you know, all of these, you know, big themes that it's not optional to address them. They must be addressed. You know, 2/3 of people don't want to come back to the office. You can keep fighting that and figuring out how to entice people back to the office, or you can flow with it and figure out how to accommodate it. Right. So there are big things that are not a luxury to figure out. They have to be figured out. Do you see any risk at all that, during this period that people are going to take their eye off the ball of, getting paychecks cut on time and, getting the right benefits plans rolled out and stuff like that?
I could see it if you're sort of turning over staff. I mean, I think one of the great things is I think we've seen HR leaders do really well is they've kept the trains running on time. They've kept people, they've kept things going. I know on the Work Tech podcast, you guys have talked about what happened with Kronos. And you think about just the Herculean effort from HR folks, especially in the healthcare industry, who's still got payroll out at the end of December, right before Christmas, in some of these really stressful industries when their whole system went down. So there's institutional memory there that sort of keeps that going. I don't think that's as much of a risk as I think some of the opportunity cost of not moving quickly on this stuff. So yes, you have to get the foundational stuff right, but I think for the most part, we've got that. The tougher thing is sort of figuring out, okay, where do we go next? There's 5 fires burning. Which one can I put out right now?
Yeah, and so in some ways, I guess it's kind of same as it ever was. Here's the biggest opportunity to establish the strategic value of HR in history. And the question is, are we going to step up to the plate and, knock the ball out of the park? Metaphor, cliche. Or are we going to kind of revert, to some patterns that we've seen in the past where, the need and drive to make sure that the block and tackling is, always there, will limit our ability to execute on, some of these more innovative but necessary initiatives. So I guess the more things change, the more they stay the same, but we'll see what happens. Pretty optimistic.
That's
actually.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think having that sort of operational excellence, we've seen lots of, innovative companies sort of keep that excellence in place as they've invented new things, as they've sort of broken paradigms inside the organization and in industry. So can't you do that with your people ops? Yeah. It seems like you can, right? Like, can you have a great, can you have a great, manufacturing capabilities, supply chain, that sort of thing, and still be innovative? Absolutely. So why can't we do that with people?
Yeah. And, increasingly it's not, can we, but how, do we?
Yeah,
because
we have to.
We have to, there's no choice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, interesting times. Well, I want to get back to the newsletter. So thanks for sharing, your background and, kind of all the, the interesting, milestones and steps and paths that you've traveled to, kind of be doing what you're doing now. Why in the world, would the Star Conspiracy, start putting out a newsletter, that's, targeted to work leaders and HR people and stuff like that? And why would we believe that anyone would actually, take us seriously?
I mean, sometimes we're not serious, but we like to have fun. I think, one of the things that we've done, I think, since I've been here, so 9 years. So at least since I've been here, we've done a really good job of, I think, staying grounded in data and looking at the big picture of what's going on, not just the technology, but just, in a lot of the research that we've done. So I know I've been involved in dozens of, quantitative research projects over the years. And so you just sort of, either your eyes glaze over on that stuff or your eyes sort of widen on that stuff. Yeah. And I think we've got a whole organization that their eyes widen when they see that information. They see the data, they see the research come in, they get excited about it. And it's exciting to, not all of our partners are as excited as we are about this stuff, but it's so exciting when you talk to somebody who is. We're finishing up a report that I'll talk about whenever it gets released. But these guys were so excited about like what we found, and there's just so much, and it's so rich that we can't even publish it all. Like it's too big to read, and it's just a lot of information in there. So that's the sort of stuff we're just embedded in every day. And we have free reign to sort of just go outside the box and look at sort of what's going on in the world. And so, we've carried the mantle of employee engagement. Our research has informed RFPs for big companies, big automakers. I know for sure has come across. We've just done a ton of stuff on this in this industry. Not because, not necessarily because there's a business opportunity there, but there is, but also just because we actually care about this stuff. We see the impact of our work ripple across, I think, workforce populations, which is amazing. I mean, like if you connect it to that level, it's actually very, very rewarding.
Yeah. And you said a lot of things that, I just want to double click on because, the reality is, in order to do a great job for the work tech vendors that we work with, we have to know the voice of their customer. And so, as you say, we do tons of research. We have tons of conversations, with, people in decision-making roles within HR and, kind of the executive team that is involved in some of these more significant decisions. And so we get a lot of direct sentiment, from HR folks. So we've been kind of engaged in that dialogue for a long time so that we could do what our primary line of business was, which was, mostly brand and marketing stuff for work tech vendors. But, a few things that, just really have sent signals to us, over the years, but also, very recently, you mentioned RFPs. We started to notice several years ago that we had a lot of HR people downloading our content, our brandscapes, our, kind of thought leadership on employee experience or engagement or, whatever it was at the time. And we've talked to organizations that actually structured their RFPs based on the research that we were publishing. So we already knew that we kind of had an audience in HR, both in terms of, the people we've just met while we've been doing research over the last 20 years. But also that people were, finding our content. And sometimes that content was the definitive content for a period of time around a topic, like, our early work on engagement and experience. We just had a lot more content, information, data, models, stuff like that out there than anyone else for a period of time. But one of the real pleasant surprises when you decided that you wanted to do this was, we have a much larger HR audience than we probably, thought about in terms of just, already sitting in our database, already engaged with our content, et cetera. And so in many ways, it seems to me like this was just serving a segment of our, customer base that we've unknowingly had for a long time, but that they weren't really getting any special attention from us. And so it wasn't like we had to go out and, establish a new channel or something like that.
That's
for
right.
People to, for us to send the newsletter to somebody.
I think, yeah, go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay. Well, I was going to just mention, I mean, anybody who is sort of a face of the Star Conspiracy has had conversations with HR folks about what we're seeing in the market. What vendor should they talk to? I know I've had, so many conversations, and usually, folks reach out on LinkedIn or they email me. They're saying like, we're doing RFP. I feel like I'm missing somebody here. Here's my list. Can you just validate it? Like, yeah, of course. Like, I'll pull up just like my latest research. I'll say, you're missing these guys. These folks are new. Make sure you're including them and taking a close look at them because they're kind of, a new thing. So yeah, I mean, I think we sort of built an audience and built some trust with those folks as we sort of built out a lot of our content that's primarily driven towards vendors is more about market education, about more about figuring out just what's kind of going on, making sense of what's happening in the world. And there's, right now, as we talked about, there's a great appetite for sense making. Like help me figure out what the heck's going on. And so it's great being able to have those conversations in a really intentional way with work leaders.
Yeah, and so much so, that the market is underserved. The HR market is underserved in terms of people getting the guidance that they need to make sense of, kind of how to connect what their observations are within their own company and how things are changing with what solutions are available from a software services perspective, from just a strategic framework perspective, ideas for thinking things through in a holistic manner. And so, increasingly we're getting pulled in that direction because a lot of the stuff that we do on the CX side for work tech vendors is very similar to, what companies need from an HR perspective. We do a lot of message projects on the CX. One of the things that, constantly comes across as a strategic need is for companies to develop a solid employee value proposition or employer value proposition, however you want to refer to it, which, for us has always been, more of almost like a strategic roadmap than just an exercise in putting pretty words together, right? It's like, this is what we stand for and this is how we're going to build the company that we want to build. And, how to know whether, you want to be here or not. So that's going to be interesting to watch over time as it evolves. But, I know that I definitely want to talk about something that was in the newsletter, but I've just got to ask, one more question. We're very meta today. This is our first one.
That's right.
And,
we got license to do it today.
Yeah. And then we can't talk about it this much. But how do you put the newsletter together? What does it look like, and what's the process? I know there's a team of people working on it, but like, what are people going to read, and where does it come from?
A lot of it is just stuff I've collected. So I think part of my just sort of daily motion of reading things, of reading certain, reading up on certain topics, keeping up on, so I've got custom Google searches, and I've got, newsletters that I follow, and I read just a ton of things. And so probably 10% of the stuff that I read, 5% of the stuff I read makes it in a newsletter because it's interesting, because it's something that hasn't been said before, or something that's different than what I said, or what I've seen at least out there in the market. And then everybody at the Star Conspiracy and, folks that, I'm connected with, they're always sending me stuff too. They're like, I think this would be good. This is interesting because I read this and it got me thinking about this other issue. So I think that's a lot of, the types of stories that we're sharing, trying to get sort of a pulse of things. You can't do that without, being engaged in sort of what's being written about, what's happening out there in the market. And so that's a big piece of what we're doing. So yeah, we try to make sense of sort of that. We try to keep it, somewhat short, so try to keep, 2 to 3 longer form sort of write-ups, and then, links out to, sort of a choose your own adventure on the rest of the newsletter.
Well, I've got to compliment you. I love your newsletter, and I want to put it in context around why I love it, and kind of flesh out a few of the things that you mentioned that kind of make this a very different newsletter. My inbox is just filled with HR content, newsletters, and stuff like that I probably get 20 a week, right? Yeah. And first of all, they all have too much stuff in them. And second, they all tend to aggregate stuff from kind of the same places. So I'll often see the same article, like in 5 different, places or whatever. And there's also, for me, a lack of, a curated insight that gets delivered. And so what I love about your newsletter, it's the only one that I read. I read it every week, and, I feel like I got the best of the best, because there's always like an opening article where it's, kind of unique thought leadership about your observations, what's going on in the world of HR or the world of work leaders. And it's always a great thought starter. And it's really, well reasoned and, argued, and, ties it into the broader discourse that's going on, because it'll often reference, kind of points and counterpoints that exist in kind of other articles. But then, there's this, summary of, some number of articles that you've decided to share. And, just to put that in perspective, when you said people are sending you stuff, well, we've got about 80 people at the Star Conspiracy, and all they're doing is reading stuff like this because they use it to inform articles that they're writing for clients or research or whatever. So we've got people who are consuming information all the time. And, about 95% of it is total bullshit. And about 5% of it stands out as being something that's incredibly insightful, original, and useful. And what I love is that when I read your newsletter, I read every article in there because they're all great. Sometimes they're just like, okay, I'm just going to click through to this one and just read a couple of lines or whatever. But then I just fall into the article because it's, it really is like a digest of the best content, and highly curated by people who are not just, feeding stuff to you, but, sending stuff to you that they found significant, important, and well done. And so I absolutely love it. And I just think you do a great job on it. And I just want you to know that.
Oh, thanks, man.
And, I
love it. It's like my favorite thing. It's one of my favorite things. I mean, like I love a lot of things about working at Star Conspiracy. This is like one of the most fun things I've worked on, just because, a lot of it is just stuff I was already doing and stuff I was thinking, but just putting pen to paper helps sort of cement so much more for that. So, I'm hoping the same happens with this podcast too.
Yeah. And I just, I see the numbers every week of, how many new people have signed up for, everything that we have. And the growth of this newsletter has just been, astounding to me. I mean, it's just, of course, because it's so well done and so badly needed. And so I'm really looking forward to how this thing, evolves over time. So
yeah, me too.
Where do people go to get this newsletter?
Yeah, they go to starconspiracy.com.
So it's under, you can just hit
resources,
subscribe.
I think. Yeah. Hit subscribe, put your information in. We'll get you the newsletter every week. That's what we do.
Yeah. And, I do want to take this opportunity because I always forget, if you enjoyed this conversation today, please subscribe. And what happens when you subscribe is that you'll be notified as soon as the videos are uploaded, as opposed to when they're actually promoted, going out with newsletters and stuff like that. So make sure to hit the subscribe button. Leave us a comment. We'll get to them pretty quickly. Yeah. And Lance, I'm excited to have had this inaugural podcast about what you're doing with the Work Leader Weekly. I love the content, and we were supposed to talk about purpose and purpose-led organizations and how this was a great article in your last newsletter, the intersection of individual purpose with company purpose, and kind of how to navigate those difficult waters. But I just got too excited talking about the actual newsletter itself. Okay. And we talked about a bunch of other stuff. So maybe we'll
talk about purpose for hours and hours too.
Yeah, no kidding. But following, this episode, what we're going to be talking about on a weekly basis are some of the topics that are surfaced in the newsletters that you wrote in the week past or the week that's coming up. And I'm really looking forward to those conversations and learning a bunch from you. And I hope everyone out there who's listening to this will join us for the next one.
Me too, man. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Lance. Talk to you next week.
Thanks, Bret. Cheers.